So I want to go through the counting of the Omer. Now remember, um, my whole practice of the Omer in a way reflects my theory of religion and theory of Judaism. It's very well with a German philosopher I've been reading lately, Friedrich Schleiermacher. He's a counterbalance to Kant and Hegel, who in many ways formed modern Jewish thought, especially Reform Judaism. And when anybody says Judaism is developmental and progressive, well, that's Hegel. And when people say Judaism is founded on ethics, ethics is the essence of Judaism, and there were many books on that title, that's Kant. Well, Schleiermacher has an entirely different view of what religion is, and he says you cannot extract a metaphysical system from religion and think that you understand religion. He says you may have a metaphysical system. For example, God is one, and then talk about the oneness of God. That might be true, but it's not Judaism. And the same thing to extract out Jewish ethics and talk about being an ethical person. He says that's good, but it's not religion, or I would say it's not Judaism. So he goes on and and I'll give you a couple of words on religion, and this takes me to the way that I've discovered him uh, in many ways toward the end of my intellectual life. I wish I'd read him earlier, but he was never on the assigned reading list. I read plenty of Kant and plenty of Hegel, but not any Schleiermacher, except reading, an article about him so I could answer who he was on a test. In any case, as I'm reading through the book, he comes up with a definition that I really love. He says, the experience of religion is chaotic. And then I began to look at myself, what my practice is. In the morning, I take one part of the prayer book. I try to read a seventh every week because all of it is way too much, and I want to be able to really sink into. So on Sunday, I read Birkot HaShachar. On Monday, I read Pesukei de Zimmer and so forth. And even when I do that, I typically pick only one or two phrases. And I guess in a couple of years, I will have read the entire morning service. But I just want to stay connected to the Siddur, go into the poetry of the depths of it, but be able to luxuriate in just one or two verses. Then I study Psalms. I open my Tanakh. I'm more or less trying to read in order, but it doesn't happen that way. I've been recently reading Psalm 37, stuck on it for a week. No hurry. And again, I find a word, a phrase, an allusion, and I find myself just sinking into it. Um, it takes me to another part of the Tanakh. It takes me to something else that I learned elsewhere. Now and then there's a strange word that I have to look up. I have a Zohar teacher that I study with every Thursday, and I always review what we've studied. So that's part of my Jewish religious practice. I have a Talmud class that I was taking, and I review what we studied there. So now, Schleiermacher, what is it? What for me does it feel like to be Jewish? It's fragmentary. I don't start out with a system. Well, here's my system of metaphysics, and here's my system of ethics, and God is one, and and treat each other person as if they are an ends, not a means. I never think about that stuff. It's in the back of my mind somewhere. I mean, if somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Do you think God is one?" I say, "Yeah, that's an easy way to think about God. I have no problem with that." Someone said to me, "Do you think you should treat people as ends and not as means?" Yeah, that sounds good. Now, can I get back to studying? So the problem with extracting it as a system, you think when you have a system, um, that you understood what it's like to be on the inside of religion. Schleiermacher is writing a book called "On Religion: An Answer to its dis like the critics who despise religion, meaning his friends, his super educated German friends involved in German idealistic poetry, and they've all abandoned religion because for them it's a dead letter, which means it's form without any kind of substance whatsoever. And he's saying, because you've learned to extract a system from a practice. So he says, when it's chaotic, what you don't try to do is create a system. When it's chaotic, every particular part of the chaos is where the light is where the truth is. Another way of saying it is, what you're studying now is the truth. So when I'm studying the Siddur, that's a moment of truth. When I study Tanakh, that's a moment of truth. When I'm studying Zohar, that's a moment of truth. When I'm studying Talmud, that's a moment of truth. And what I don't do is, at the end of the day, try to create a system. What I do is I try to remember what I studied, remember what I learned. Many side conversations throughout the day are involved in these things. And this idea that religion is something like for me, a symbolic, poetic, mythic phenomenon that we dip into in fragmentary nature, and over time, and our soul puts it together, but we don't reduce it to a system. Anyway, that's just a tiny bit of Schleiermacher, and that led me to reflect on how I'm teaching about counting the Omer. Now remember, if you count the Omer, this is the first day of Chesed, the second day of Chesed, or this is the Chesed of Chesed, the Gevura of Chesed. Notice, although I did that for years and it can be very instructive, you're turning it into a system. It's becoming rote. What do I do during the counting of the Omer? Well, I look at the day. Well, this is the week of Gevura. I look at the permutation of Gevura. This is the Chesed of Gevura, and I do a meditation on the Chesed of Gevura. So notice it's become a system. Now, so I did that for years, and many, many years ago, I just felt to myself, it's just not working for me. It's like I'm forcing my spirit to say, today I need to think about this, but my soul needed to think about something else. So because I know the names of the Sfirot, I know where I've been before, I sit down and say, well, I do say, well, it's the time of the year to think about the Sfirot. I know what week we're in in general, but I don't know. Sometimes I don't know exactly when the weeks turn because, I'll find out eventually. I'm not that punctilious about those things. And then I sink into the Sphira. I've studied them enough before that when I sink into it, you might say, the pool is ready to be sunken into. And then I wait to see what happens. I'm bringing my consciousness into the cavern. Um, the chaos in the cavern responds to my light of consciousness coming there. Meanings form, in a conversation between my consciousness and the depth of the tradition. Typically, something happens, some experience is brought up to me, something for me to put my hands on something. Associations are made. I always ask, do I have anything to learn? Do I think have anything to teach here? I give it a few moments and then I'm done for the day. So I've been now calling it living through the Omer instead of counting the Omer. And I think for the rest of my life, I will not say, if I say counting the Omer, I won't leave it there. I'll say, yes, we are moving through the different weeks, but we're living it. We're going inside of it. It's something that's alive. And when we go into it, into this living, I want to even say breathing in the sense that it has a neshama, that there's an encounter, and in that encounter, right, we go through something. So here's what happens in the encounter. And this is much more purely spiritual psychology. I used to teach spiritual psychology all the time, everywhere. I began to learn that nearly all the questions I got after I was done with my talk, I take questions, is about problems in relationships, no matter what I taught. So any questions? Yes. My wife this, my husband this, my child this, my parent this. I said, I'm going to think I'm going to go to virtue and, basically get everybody on the virtue page and then do spiritual psychology. People are really suffering. And they want to say, well, I don't teach virtue. I teach spiritual psychology. So, go home and suffer on your own. And as I began teaching virtue and wisdom and so forth, classes got bigger. People came, told me they really helped them. I said, and okay, then a star was born, right? And that's what I began doing. But remember, I say to people, they say, well, what's next? I would say to people, uh, I said, teaching virtue and wisdom is good in its own right. How to manage interpersonal relationships, how to manage your own inner life. But for me, it's all for the sake that we can connect to spirit. It's all for the sake that we can have a relationship with the word, as we saw in the poem, and not have it be disturbed by tumultuous interpersonal relationships or a dysregulated inner life. So for me, um, living virtuous lives and having regulated inner lives is good in and of itself. But for me, it's the foundation for a life of spirit and touching the infinite and allowing the infinite to touch us, where God is very present. What banishes God from people's lives is distraught emotions, poor thinking habits, tumultuous interpersonal relationships. So this is a time for me to remind all of you, I, the world of virtue and my wisdom works, I take it utterly seriously. But as I've been working on my outline, just about done with it, level one is virtue, meaning virtue, rationality, and reasoning. Level two, managing the inner life, personality theory, my ego states practice. Level three is spiritual psychology. In many ways, where all the system was birthed. All right, so I want to anecdotally walk through the Sfirot and try to give a thought, a vorta, a word at the end in Malchut, and then a little teaching on Eheyeh, the first revelation at Mount Sinai, which was God's personal revelation to Moses, which actually for me is much more meaningful than the revelation at Mount Sinai to the people with Aseret HaDibrot, with the Decalogue. The revelation to Moshe, for me, is a much deeper spiritual experience than reading the Ten Commandments. So let's go to Chesed. As I look at my my kind of scattershot counseling over the past several weeks, one theme has come up three times, and therefore it's true. I mean, something I need to teach. And that is, by the way, this has all been with men, and due sometimes to the complaints of their spouse and children, that they're anxious, they're uptight, they get upset about the smallest things. Um, they point out other people's faults mercilessly, but they don't look at their own faults. And they're trying to work on themselves. And because I had gone through the week of Chesed, I say to them, look, I want you to consider something. We've never talked about God or spirituality, but I want you to try to imagine that there's something in the inner life of the divine called Chesed that's trying to reach into this world, meaning a sense of people feeling the care and love and grace of God. But for most people, this channel can only come from other human beings. And from this Kabbalistic idea, it's I don't want to go into Shivirat HaKelim, the brokenness of God. I'll just talk the brokenness of human beings. I said, I want you to imagine that you can be a channel of Chesed. You can let go of your demands, your needs, expectations, entitlements, and demands. You can let go of correcting other people. You can let go of telling them how unreasonable your spouse is or how, disrespectful your kids are. You can let go of that just for a little bit and replace it with being a channel of chesed. Let it fill your entire being. And when something comes up, you're filled with care and love and grace, which for me always feels joyous. And you just have a joy. And they say, what are you so happy about? I love you. I love being in this family, right? And I'm sorry when I don't channel the love. And some guy said, well, I couldn't do this because my wife doesn't like it. I said, okay, I'm sorry, I gave it a try. I've had a couple of people, though, write me an email and said, that was a transformative experience. This one guy, he's been an ornery customer. He's off and on for years. I keep trying to make this point. He disappears, finds a better therapist, and comes back to me. And I try to teach this again, and he disappears. So I said, "Look, man, I'm not going to get off this page, right? You get very frustrated. You want reciprocity. You're very demanding." I said, "Just and he has enough depth of spirit to be able to do it. Just be a channel of light." He did it. And he said, I finally got it. He says, I honestly did not know what you were talking about. He said, it's been an amazing experience to know that this is in me. I could be it. And look at the effect that it's had on my wife and children. Um, so as I think about this, I mean, anecdotally, experiencing yourself as a channel of chesed is a transformative experience. Now, from these few people that I've been trying to convince of this, what's their block? Other people are not a channel of chesed. Other people have disproportionate emotions. Other people are critical of me. So this idea of reciprocity, I will be a mirror of what they do. And I said, don't you think, Rabbi Finn, there should be fairness? I said, that's the next sphera. You know, Gevurah Din is about fairness. I'm talking about one thing. So here's something else, by the way. I'm sure I see Helena here, a few other uh, soul healers, soul caretakers. um, People jump ship. I'm talking about chesed. They want to talk about gevura. They don't know those terms. I want to talk about love. They want to talk about fairness. So I'm not talking about fairness. Well, don't you think you should talk talking about fairness? I said, actually, normally I would take the bait and we talk about reciprocity in relationships. I have a teaching, but I'm not doing that this time. I really want to talk about you creating in yourself a channel of chesed, and I'm not letting go. I said, or you don't have to call me back. We don't need to meet again but I'm not letting up. I've known you long enough to know this is what you need to learn, and we don't need to talk about reciprocity in relationships anymore. So there it was. And it's happened more than once. It's happened in my life too, where I will send a mull on lack of reciprocity and why this and this isn't fair. And I catch myself and I say to myself, I just want to be a channel of chesed. Not that I'm after anything, not that anybody has to imitate me. It's just much more deep, and I experience God much more when I'm off of reciprocity, not fair. Yes, and in general, relationships should aim towards some degree of reciprocity and fairness, but day to day, it's not going to happen. Relationships are difficult, and there's no cause. It's because we're humans. I think of that line from Psalm 119, Ger anochi ba'aretz. I'm a stranger, or Moshe, I'm a stranger in a strange land. Psalm 119 he says, don't hide your mitzvahs from me. Mitzvahs mean, what do you want me to do now? I'm strange. It's strange, and I don't know what to do. And so then it says, don't hide from me your mitzvah. There's something I'm supposed to do. This is Psalm 119:17, I think. Don't hide from me what I'm supposed to do. Well, I'm not waiting for a revelation from heaven. There's something deep in me that knows what to do. I'm just blocking it. And it might be my attachment to fairness, my attachment to reciprocity, which means I don't want to take responsibility for the fact that I need to be a channel of chesed. So now, when I got to Gevurah Din, I remember many conversations where people, again, men and women, fell into the why question. They'll be talking about something, and the spouse will say, well, why do you think that? Why do you do that? And they would start to explain and then get all befuddled. And I would look at them and say, do you remember when someone says why, you say question or complaint? That's your reaction. That's your Pavlovian reaction. Question or complaint. If you want to know why I do things, for me to look in the deepest chambers of my heart and looking for my hidden motivations, I'll get back to you tomorrow. However, if you just don't want to register that you don't like what I did, just say complaint. I don't like what you're doing. I don't like what you did. I don't like who you just say it. Just say you don't like it. Now, why? What is the brilliance of saying question or complaint? You're setting up a boundary because people, especially with people who are what I'll call who can fall into the defensive state of mind, have a basic drive to explain themselves, to justify themselves. And of course, once they start explaining and justifying themselves to a resistant person or hostile person, it's not going to make any difference. So as I'm trying to find out how do these struggles begin? It often begins with the insincere why question or the hidden complaint. So I teach them a script, question or complaint. If question, I will consult my tarot cards and get back to you tomorrow. Okay, that's sarcastic. If it's a complaint, say your complaint. And once they say the complaint, I say, here's the script. You're right. That's quirky. That might be a character flaw. However, it's where I am at this point in my life. And I don't want to be every day reminded that I'm a deficient person. I won't do it to you. Please don't do it to me. I'm a work in progress. And just set up a boundary. I This is a quote. I don't want to be reminded every day that I'm deficient. You remind me once a day, but that's it. And people say, "Oh, well, I couldn't say that," and they'll just get mad. I said, "You've just got to memorize this script. Just memorize this script." Now, a script is an act of gevurah din, which means I'm setting out a kind, clear, firm boundary. There's enough truth to it. I'm keeping another person's hostility at bay. I'm restoring my dignity as a human being, reminding myself that I do have flaws and maybe even some character flaws, but not enough that one's relationship with other people ought to be founded on the idea that people get to remind you every day that you're a deficient person. Now, parents do it to kids, kids to parents, spouses with each other. Now, this, by the way, I've given you heard me give this advice 1,000 times. Other people don't come to our services and so forth. But this little teaching from Gevura Din can fundamentally change a person's experience of themselves, even to be reminded, yeah, I'm quirky, but that's not all I am. I'm also a child of God. I also have a life of spirit. I'm not just you, the object of your complaints, which is where some relationships can fall. I went into the area of emet tiferet emet. A very brief line here. I remember, ironically, I knew somebody very involved in the art world, loved art, and was not a beautiful human being. And I remember sitting with that. The person was sarcastic, quick to criticize, very defensive. And I thought to myself, for all this person's mastery of the art world, it was like another person being, mastery of cars or mastery of stamps, meaning it was a commodity. It was something that he knew how to buy and sell. He knew how to make a deal. He could certainly admire it, but he hadn't internalized what it meant to be a beautiful human being. Now that's hard to define. And remember, all words that describe core experiences of human beings cannot be defined. They resist definition. I put up a little thing on Facebook recently, and reading Schleiermacher, and he talked about the sublimity. I think Schleiermacher or his friend Schlegel. He said something about um, contemplating truth, reason, and beauty. Very beautiful phrase. I'll find it for you. Reasoning about these things are sublime. So someone right away wrote, "Well, you can't define these things. But you can't define these things," right away. And so I wrote, I said, our work is not to define these words. Our work is to reason and discuss these words. Okay, reasoning about holy words is sublime. Then a Facebook friend from the Viktor Frankl group, a guy named Peter McRobot, jumped in. Very eloquent, very smart guy. He wrote, like a 5 paragraph disquisition defending my point of view. I thought to myself, I got to take this guy everywhere I go. So I said, "Help me." I said, "Pete, why don't you take this guy out?" Thank you. Very eloquent, very sharp. And so we've developed one of the nicest things happening to me on Facebook in years is finding this person that every time I post something, it's like and someone wants to like criticize me, boom, Pete my robot comes in and hammers away. It's very, I find it quite beautiful. And I wrote him. I said, "Man, you have such depth of spirit. Thank you so much." Many things that this guy has posted, I've actually cut, pasted, and put into a document. I mean, the guy just writes beautiful, beautiful things. There we go. Beauty. Truth. I go into being an authentic human being. And one person said, "But I'm not the same person everywhere. Is that not inauthentic?" And I said, the truth is, you might call the central system, that what Assagioli calls the self with capital S, who sees the different aspects of the inner life, who can master the active will and know which subpersonality, which ego state to bring to bear at a given moment to a given degree of intensity, because it has holy work to do, sometimes to be loving, sometimes to draw a boundary, and then pull back. So sometimes people say to me, "But why should I be drawing boundaries when you said I should be an agent of chesed?" I say, "Okay, so, great. We'll pull back, center yourself in the core self, the capital S, that can see everything and can bring the will to any ego state which the moment requires, positive ego state. And you do it enough, then you create space and, kind of go back to your center, you watch. And what you're doing is you are directing aspects of your core self into the world in an authentic way. So being authentic doesn't mean being the same. Being authentic means you're bringing the core self to bear as the situation needs. So, our sub personalities, negative ego states and sub personalities typically bedevil us because they're not voluntary. Suddenly I'm angry, resentful, afraid. When you get to a certain point of mastery, your positive ego states are voluntary. You have the habit of quieting down your disruptive negative ego state. You master being you master being in your center. Something happens, you're able to take a breath, pause a beat, and with enough training, you know how to bring down, well, a person's out of line. Do I bring down boundary setting, or is this a time to overwhelm the person with love? Sometimes an obstreperous person needs boundary setting. Sometimes that person needs love. Sometimes you need to be vulnerable. Say, you may be right, but that really hurt my feelings. I think I shared that. I tried that once where at a faculty meeting, a person, at the larger meeting, the person, I said something, I offered an idea, and the person really attacked me in front of a lot of people. And I took a breath. I said, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm not going to respond to this. Well, uh, that it was a fellow faculty person who was up for renewal for her position. And I was on the faculty renewal committee. And we sat down and she looked at me, she went, oh crap. I could just see, I think I got a no vote. And I told the chair, I said, I think I should recuse myself because you just saw a very unpleasant incident in the other room. He begged me to stay. He says, Mordecai, I want you to stay. Right. And I said, okay. We went through it. She was, avoiding eye contact. At a certain point, I said to her, you know, you said something important, but I want to tell you, you hurt my feelings and you shamed me in public. She said, well, I meant to do this and I meant to this and I didn't really. I said, I just want to share with you, you hurt my feelings and you shamed me in public. And she again tried to explain away, and I just stayed right there. Became very vulnerable, which is not my happy place. I said, you hurt my feelings and you shamed me in public. And tears came to her eyes. She says, I really, really apologize. I said, thank you. And then we approved her unanimously. Okay. And that's why the chair of committee to me wanted me in there, because he trusted me enough to do what I did. And suddenly I got it, right? I have that capacity, right? And I had to reach inside myself and bring pure vulnerability and chesed. Here's my chesed line. I'm, I want you to become a better person, a better faculty person. So I want to model for you vulnerability and vulnerable truth. I just want to model that for you. And we need to see what that evokes from you. And what it evoked from her was true regret, true remorse, and desire to care for me in the form of an apology. So that's what I can call, moments of beauty and truth. So as I go through the Sfirot, when I went into Netzach, working with the will, I've already mentioned that today. Hod, which I sometimes describe from a from an interpersonal relationship as good manners. A beautiful setting, both the table and the room and hosting and decor. And I've gone to places where, something went awry at the table, and I'm glancing at the host. Are you going to reset Hod at this table? Are you going to let one of your guests go off on their other guests? And I look over, and the person, oh, you guys are adults. I thought to myself, that's not what a host does. A host makes sure that everybody enjoys themselves and says, hey, let's pause that conversation and move on. And some people know that that's their duty as a host, and some people don't. Last week on Yesod, I went into a strong case for the moral foundations of the liberal state and how profoundly deeply I intend that and mean that, and we should promote it and defend it whenever possible. And that has been the most pernicious uh, result of this DEI is destabilizing the idea of a foundation of morality, of human equality, and able to reason through moral issues. When people say don't talk and you are who you are because you're an oppressor and I can say anything I want because I'm a victim, that eviscerates the whole foundations of the liberal state. So after October 7th, I was teaching that, teaching that, teaching that, and I realized I got to teach that down again. So here we are in Malchut. So Malchut, by the way, this sphera, the 10th sphere, Malchut, is sometimes called Malchut, which means sovereignty, ironically. Shekhinah, somewhat ironically. Why? Because when I began teaching rabbinical school and teaching Kabbalah, I realized that many of my students, mostly my women students, has studied Shekhinah as the feminine indwelling of God, a presence of light and grace, which is true. However, in the Zohar, the 10th Sfirah, Malchut Shekhinah, can go very bad, can go rogue, right? Can be filled with anger and ferocity because the Kabbalists were trying to understand history. Why is history sometimes benign? And why is history sometimes so destructive? Because they saw history as the place of the Sefirot coming into the world. And they're asking themselves, well, what happened? Because the Sitra Achra, the other side, the evil other side, has taken a hold of uh, Shekhinah Malchut and turned her against the Godhead. So she's trapped, she's imprisoned. And therefore, this is the basic Kabbalistic myth. The job of the Kabbalist is to rescue Malchut Shekhinah from the prison of the Sitra Achra. Okay, you see this all throughout the Zohar. So the Zohar is, of all the Sfirot, the Zohar spends more time on Malchut Shekhinah than on any other Sephira. And as they devote it's as the authors devote their time to this Sphira, what they focus in is the ambivalence. Sometimes there's one valence, sometimes there's a different valence. They talk about a multicolored rose that has white and red petals. Sometimes it's a white petal, sometimes it's a red petal. So therefore, when we go into Malchut Shekhinah, all right, putting history aside, putting whether Malchut Shekhinah is kidnapped by the Sitra Achra, we look at ourselves. If white means we're connected to the higher versions of the upper Sphirot, and red means we've gone rogue, we all go through this interplay. In every one of these Sphirot, you can remember times when you were working ultimately at the higher level or you descended into the lower level of the Sphirah. Then look at other people. Look at other people who have hurt you. Look at people who have disappointed you. And ask yourself, just, for an attempt at doing Kabbalistic interpretation theory, what Sephira is that? And were they operating at a lower point in that Sephira? For example, judgment can become judgmentalism, or it can become good moral judgment. Um, and then you start to see where other people are struggling. If you like using Kabbalah as a psychological system, you can look at yourself, you can look at other people, and see where they fit in the system of the Sfirot, and you can identify what Sephira this behavior is coming from. Where in the Sphira we have higher level, mid level, and low level thinking, feeling, and behaving, and therefore, what is our role in helping them in that Sphira move to a higher level of functioning? We should all be high functioning chesed, high functioning gevura in ourselves and with other people. So the meditation on Malchut Shekhinah, now that we've gone through all seven, now that we've gone through all six, and number seven is when we reflect and evaluate on all the others. Now that we've gone through all this, we can take a long look at ourselves and ask ourselves, if our personalities are complex and Kabbalistically, if our personalities, you might say, is working through the complexity of all of these six spheros, you get a sense of what the organism is or what the mechanism is. You can see these upper six spherot in play, and in the seventh sphera, you can see your brokenness. You can see the ambivalence, the ambivalence in you going from the higher level to the lower level. You can see it in other people, and when we see that, for me, what happens to me, I get reminded, to the degree that we have any purpose or meaning in life, and I believe we do. Right? For me, when I try to articulate, the main purpose of my life is to repair the shattered vessels. That's my purpose here. The shattered vessels in me, the shattered vessels in others, and the shattered vessels of the divine. Now, I could articulate this in many different ways. For the period of the Omer, that's the way I want to say it. So that's my purpose. Meaning in life, if I'll say meaning is when purpose meets adversity, I like that idea. Meaning comes when I'm working through something and something in me wants to stay at a lower functioning sphera, And that center core self that Asad Julie talks about says you're not staying there. Um, we're going to push you higher. And by the way, just this is a hopefully 1 minute digression. Many people say, and it's true, that we experience the world through a lens. That's true, but the lens is not static. Yes, but there's something called higher consciousness that can shape the lens. So whenever people say, we don't experience the world, we all have our own story, we have our own truth, we have our own lens. I say, yeah, but the lens is malleable based on what? Based on whether you're living in your center, whether you're based on your higher self. The lens can be shaped according to what? I said, I can't explain that. If a person does not have an experience of what Sajuli would call the center self, with a capital S, or the higher self, if they have no knowledge of that, you can never explain what it means to be accountable for your lens through which you see and behave in the world. Okay. But it's true. Yes, we do have a lens, and our experience of the world is created by that lens. However, you are accountable for what that lens does. You're accountable for how it sees the world. And with enough work, we understand there has to be a spiritual dimension to the lens, a moral dimension to the lens. There's all kinds of things at play, but you are responsible for your experience of the world because we can change that lens. So this is one of the main things that I take away from Malchut Shekhinah. Now, all of this is leading to the holiday of Shavuot. So I'm asking myself, well, is there something to be revealed here? And it's all been revelatory. And then I had my Kabbalah mentoring session on Thursday. And quite by accident, we're finishing a section it's in Shir Hashirim. Song It's the Zohar Hadash on Shir Hashirim. I put the citation in my Shabbat email. And the Zohar Hadash on Shir Hashirim is a long, long meditation where we talk about the pleasant perfume of the lover. And so it's called the Reach Nichoach. And talking about the pleasant perfume of the experience of the divine. The clothes of Esav that Jacob put on. And the Zohar says when Esav was wearing them, there was one odor, and when Jacob wore them, the breeze from the Garden of Eden could be detected. So it's this idea that using the olfactory sense as a metaphor for how we experience the world, ourselves, other people, and God. And then it goes into the idea that reach, resh het or resh yod het, reach, uh, phonologically brings out the word yareach, which is the moon. Okay, so just by similarity in sound, they move to yareach, which is the moon. And Kabbalistically, the moon has no light of its own. It only reflects the light of the sun. So this is where Malchut Shekhinah, she has no light of her own. She needs the light of the sun. And the same thing with prophecy. You might say we are all the unlit moon until the sun shines on this, and then we can shine, as a moon, not as the sun, we can shine the divine light. So into a disquisition of the nature of prophecy as the moon shining, you know, being a reflection of sunlight, and then went to Moses and said, "What happened with Moses at Mount Sinai? Um, as it were, the sky cleared, and the sun was able to shine on the moon. This is Moses." And Moses was able to experience the sunlight of God. He went from the completely unlit moon to the lit moon when God said, "Ehyeh." So remember when you look at Exodus chapter 3:15, Moses says, "Who shall I say sent me?" He said, "Well, who are you?" God says, "Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I shall be as I shall be." And they say that Ehyeh sent you. So you have three times Ehyeh, Ehyeh, Ehyeh. Well, in this passage from the Zohar, it says it's three stages of divine disclosure. So one part of Zohar Hadash is looking at the spirituality in the fragments of the letters and how the letters, as it were, come together to create meaning and form and ultimately the Word of God. And we read several pages on the letter Aleph. I didn't know where it was going because I've never studied this before. Well, it was the letter Aleph because it's the first letter of Ehyeh, I shall be. So then we were going into the suggestive forms of Hebrew letters that in their own way suggest the inner life of the Sfirot. So then it came to Ehyeh is when the letters begin to take on their form and therefore begin to emit meaning. So it's like an impressionistic painting where the dots are coming together. So that's the first A, yeah. It's like the alert. I'll say for us, the pre-linguistic alert that there's meaning in your consciousness. You suddenly realize something's happening in me. I'm I'm filled with the possibility of meaning. Like the spiritual atmosphere has changed. I know you've had that, I've had that. And what I have to do is I have to stop and ask myself, what's trying to be birthed? It can be moments of love, justice, truth, beauty. I don't know it, but I can feel when it's forming pre-linguistic. Sometimes I could feel it here forming, and I'm waiting for it to take on shape as a word, as an idea. And so that's the first air. You might say pre-linguistic thought forming, in as it were, in the mind of God as the mind of God participates in us. The second ehyeh is where it actually takes shape in you. Suddenly you can feel the beingness of God and your beingness, and it's come together, which means the divine concept has gone into Atzilut, which means emanation, Yitzirah, formation, um, a Bria, a creation, and now Yitzirah is formed within you. It's formed within you. Now the question is, do you put it into the world? So when it says Ehyeh shlachani, Ehyeh has sent me, it's as if Ehyeh is now sending you into the world with this beingness of God becoming real to you. I want to repeat that. The beingness of God has become real to you, and that with that you are sent into the world. Ehyeh sends you into the world. Now, in what manner? What do you need to do? What do you need to say? What do you need not to do? What do you need not to say? So, I mean, I took this statement from the Zohar, which was about prophecy to Moshe, and I always working into spiritual psychology, and I asked myself, the human experience, which goes back to my initial words, that one of the goals of spiritual psychology is to help us manage the inner life to the point that we can touch the infinite can touch us. It was so serendipitous that that's what we studied on Thursday, that you feel the first ayah taking shape in some pre-linguistic way. You feel it go from emanation to creation to formation within. And now that you have it within you, what are you going to do? That goes to our three-part theory of holidays. There's the symbolic dimension and the transformative dimension. Now that I've studied that, what have I become and what shall I do? And if you haven't become something different and there's nothing new to do, then you haven't ingested the holiday. Well, from a Shavuot perspective, if part of Shavuot is revelation, if you want to take this very simple definition of revelation, which is shaping in a pre-linguistic, pre-conceptual way. The second is taking form within you. And the third is in this moment of transformation, what shall I become? What shall I do? So as I've been kind of saying, well, am I going to get a revelation? Wow, I went in Thursday to study Zohar Hadash, and it was right on the page in front of me. It was one of those moments of serendipity when you want to look over your shoulder and say, what, has this, because I, been studying with this person a couple of months now, and I thought to myself, and we got on the right page on the right day, I thought to myself, has this been cooking the whole time that on this page, on this day, this would come together? And she said, what's going on with you? I said, I'm having one of those moments. I'm sorry. I explained. She said, who knows? Who knows? She said, I believe in that world, and maybe this is exactly what happened here. Anyway, that's my message for you to this Friday night, the Friday before Shavuot. Yes, David.
Yeah, thank you again for another beautiful, beautiful teaching.
Thank
I
you.
just I was wondering, I think it's interesting.
Thank you. Yes, when it says that Ehyeh shlachani, Ehyeh has sent, you're sent. Now, you say, well, what do I say? I said, how can anybody possibly know the complex truth in your soul that got born into this moment? And you want me to answer that question? Yeah, of course, there's no mitzvah. There's no like, well, I'll do the 610th of the 613. There's no written mitzvah. There's no answer book. But if you, and this is where the magic of the serendipity of Omer and my learning this on Thursday was you go through all of this and it comes into the moment where, hey, yeah, God's beingness is alive in you. And now you have to ask yourself, after all this work of living through the Omer, what have I become? What have I become? Right? What new being, you what new being have I become? And you say to yourself, not much. I said, even if not much, at least a little bit. And with this new being that's been born, what is the new being and how will you think, feel, emote, and speak differently? And so that's been my meditation since Thursday. I wanted to bring you into that because that's what I'm mulling on since Thursday. And I don't think it's going to end on Monday night, Sunday night, Monday. Um, but it's definitely give me a way to to kind of hang a hook by which I'm hanging my contemplative practice these few days.
Yeah, I just wanted
Yes.
to point out just
Yeah,
one more thing
sure.
just before we move
Okay.
on. I just want to point out how it's exactly the teaching. So
It's,
it was implicit in the poem. So another beautiful.
that's exactly right. Anybody who writes about the word, I mean, in Hebrew, it's the memra. The Hasidim, it was a huge idea in Hasidim that the Rebbe would, as it were, shape a vorta. They said, Rebbe, give us a vorta, give us a word. And it meant, a fresh teaching from the soul of the Rebbe. That was a vorta, that was a word. So this idea of becoming the word and channeling the word, I think certainly in the scriptural traditions, is very present in Hasidic Judaism. By the way, you're probably not going to hear it outside of Hasidic Judaism. Outside of Hasidic Judaism, this would be very suspect, relying on charismatic gifts. You definitely have it in Christianity, especially in the Black evangelical church. I think more than any other denomination in Christianity is being a friend said to me, when I told him what I do, he says, a friend from junior high school, we reconnected. He said, Finley, man, you are heavy in the word. I said, I think I know what that means, and it sounds like a compliment, so thank you. Yeah, heavy in the word. Like the word is like it's heavy, you got to get it out. So thank you for that, right? This idea of the vorta, of the word is a crucial idea in you know, the experience of when scripture becomes alive, the word needs to be spoken. And Joe, well, it sounds like you've gone through some sadness, and I'm really, really sorry to hear that. But your purpose cannot be taken from you, especially when you suffer severe adversity. You're suffering the brokenness of the divine and the brokenness within. Your purpose doesn't change, meaning in adverse moments where the brokenness is severe, your purpose is still to heal the brokenness, first in yourself, in others, and the divine. So wherever I go through life, I'm encountering my brokenness, the brokenness of others, and the brokenness of the divine.